Good afternoon, everyone. It's always great to be back at DLD, and this time around, it's really quite an honor and privilege to be in conversation with Omoju Miller. And we'll get right into it because we don't have too much time. So one of the things that I'd just like to quickly ask you is, beyond your bio that is on the DLD app and the DLD website, is there anything that we cannot find about you on Google?
I'm sure you probably can find it, but there are two things. I'm an amateur makeup artist. When I'm bored, I just look at YouTube videos and Instagram makeup videos and spend way too much money buying product. And another one is I used to race BMWs.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I'm a big rally fan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
but we're not...
that's another conversation.
Yes, that's brilliant. So as Alexander mentioned some of the demographics on the continent, what are the interesting trends or what are the interesting places that you're seeing the future captains of industry? Where do you see that happening, and where are those skills most needed, and how do we cultivate those skills, perhaps through the open source meetups, or what's been your experience at Github?
Some of the places that we see from just data is we see a lot of work coming out of Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt, South Africa, places that, one thing I realized that all of those places are on the coast, and I'm assuming it's also places with early internet penetration. It also happens to be places with lots and lots of young people in them, especially a place like Nigeria, which is around 200 million people. And so we're seeing lots of interesting things happening in the open source environments because people are sharing their work online, they're collaborating with each other. And something that we see, I can speak from a Nigerian perspective, is that a lot of people are very eager to learn how to code. And so people are having this self-organizing learning meetups, and they're using GitHub and open source software to organize that and to actually share their work and accelerate their work. And there are even companies now who kind of host loose competitions around this to get to actually hire employees. So they just encourage work in an open source environment as a form of talent discovery.
Brilliant. And do you see that as what's happening now that you've described? Do you feel that it is happening at the pace that is required for the progress that is needed on the African continent and generally globally, because we're in such an interconnected setting? Do you see some of that as, does it give you hope, or does it give you despair? Because sometimes a lot of the stories that we hear, particularly in the past year, has been about technology being destructive to society and not necessarily something that is uplifting. Or how do you feel about that? Is there something that we should be seeing that should give us some hope? And if so, what sort of stories or companies give you the most hope and excitement?
The technology and the deleterious effect of technology we've been hearing about in the last year are often a narrative that come from the West and from economies that are pretty much established, because what we're really talking about is using people's free time and taking that free time and using it in a way that has negative consequences. In environments that are still developing, the technologies are very core to how life works. So we can clearly see this example in fintech. We see that lots of the startups coming out are fintech startups, and that's because they are solving a very core problem, which is how do we do payments. So in those environments, technology has been radically transformative for the better. It's connecting people who heretofore had never been connected before. It's connecting the rural area to the city and allowing rural area and city to collaborate, whereas before they'd had to do that through vehicles, and that takes so much longer. It's actually connecting Africa to herself. Mm-hmm. Many of us who grew up in African countries didn't really visit other African countries. We stayed in Nigeria. Maybe you went to a few countries in West Africa because you really didn't have information. But now through online platforms, you can adventure off into the Gambia via Instagram or Zanzibar and daydream, and you're like, okay, I'm going to visit that place. So it's allowing us Africans to actually discover all of us and connect to each other in very interesting ways. Those give me infinite amount of hope. And the breathtaking one is when you go into the marketplace and you're conducting business. It's a full-on market. And people are using technology in the market to process payments. Because when I go home, I go to the market, I want to go shopping, and I don't like carrying big amounts of cash because in Nigeria, we have a bit of devaluation of our currency. So that means that the amount of cash you would have to carry, it's literally this big, and it's not cute. So online payments reduces that and also reduces the risk of violence because you're not carrying big stacks of cash. So when you want to do a transaction, it is fascinating to just transfer money to somebody's account, like bing, and you're like, it's done. It's a very interesting experience that I have because I live in San Francisco, Oakland, and I go to Lagos very often. Sometimes when I go home, I feel like I'm living in a version of the future that I don't have in San Francisco. And then when I get back to San Francisco, certain kinds of technologies are also in the future. So I'm living in these two places where this is so far ahead here, but it's not here. And this is so far ahead here, and it's not here. Hopefully one day it all balances out.
Speaking of things that are far ahead, you're the senior machine learning engineer at Github. When you look at the capabilities around machine learning and some of the technologies that are far ahead in San Francisco and not so far ahead in other parts of Africa, what are the problems in Africa that could most benefit from the laser pointer of machine learning and the types of technologies that you get to be a part of at Github, and how do we get to the point where we can actually point that laser pointer onto those real problems that may have an expression in Africa but are actually global problems that many locations deal with?
Yeah, so doing machine learning at Github allows us to do machine learning at scale on massive data sets. And one of the interesting areas that we don't do, because that's not our business, that I've been fascinated by is about genomics data. And so all human beings, we all have buddies, we get ill, and you go to the doctor's office, and the doctor prescribes you some medication. And you never quite question the efficacy of that medication. You just accept it and you take it. But if you start looking at the research, you realize that the studies that these medications were tested upon are often men, and mostly Caucasian men, maybe an N of 50 or an N of 100, and from the functions in that study, then generalizes to the population. And we've just taken this as gospel. But now in the last 20, 30 years, we're beginning to see different kinds of disease that affects people, that affects women disproportionately, that affects people of color disproportionately. And doing drug discovery for those populations is very, very difficult because we actually don't have enough of the data banks. And so, interesting, there are companies now. One of them is 54Gene, which is coming out of Nigeria. That company is building the largest data set of DNA samples of people of color, Africans in the world. And what that's going to allow is for us to actually start doing drug discovery on top of that data via machine learning to target potentially those kinds of diseases. So that's what the power of that laser pointer to an African problem can help us get ahead. And hopefully we're back here in 5 or 10 years and we say, we found this drug, it's gone through these different trials, and now we are solving XYZ types of diseases.
And that is something that is not just sort of like pointing it at an African problem, but it could be scalable to solve also other problems that are in the health tech space globally, right?
It's diversifying that data set so you can find you just need massive amounts of data. And so the long tail problems of certain kinds of small diseases that you don't have enough data for, if there's much more diversity, we probably can get a bigger N to actually do drug discovery for those data sets.
In the next 4 to 5 years, if you were having a conversation with more of the bigger companies that are typically in the Bay Area, and looking at it from the African context, but then also global South and other parts of the world, when it comes to this question of localization, what are your thoughts on that? What is the importance of localization? And also this idea, I think Ramesh Srinivasan, who spoke yesterday, talks about setting technology in the ontological way that people see themselves. What are your thoughts on that, and what are the things that you wish more tech companies would put more effort, particularly when it comes to making technology that is more empathetic or more feeling? What would be your thoughts or advice to big companies and also other companies that are coming up now as they are creating these technologies?
I'm already actually starting to see the impact of localization. And I will use one specific example of a piece of technology that I use all the time, and I use it everywhere in the world. It's Google Maps. And so I travel quite often, and I'm very, very particular about the food that I eat. And so restaurant recommendations are something that I'm very keen upon. And often you open your app, it has the data of all the restaurants you've been, the ones you've liked, the ones you've not liked, and it gives you a recommendation. But that recommendation can be enhanced. And I've seen an enhancement that I found it to be absolutely terrific. It's like, go to this restaurant because it's like that other restaurant that you like. So now you're like, you have some kind of way to actually compare it. Another fascinating thing that happened last year for maps in the Nigerian context, Google Maps works everywhere in the world because it's a planetary scale artificial intelligence machine learning system. In the context of a city like Lagos with ridiculous amounts of traffic, Google Maps is a lifesaver. It's the difference between sitting in 3 hours of traffic versus an hour and a half. That is a solid 90 minutes back for you. What they did to get even bigger adoption of maps is the voice assistant, they trained the voice assistant to now speak Nigerian English. Earlier on, English is not quite English because we all have our ways of speaking English. So they localized it to the Nigerian English voice assistant. That means that there are more people who can use that product now. Now, what my advice to them is that Nigerian English is a very good start, but that's not where you should stop. You should actually localize to the language that most people understand in that country. Nigeria has 200 million people, over 250 different languages, but there is a language where most people really speak, and it's not English, it's Pidgin, which is a version of almost like a patois type. And that is the language they should localize the voice assistant to, because then it cuts through every single thing. And it doesn't have to actually require a high level of literacy, because every single human speaks. So therefore, just adopt to the highest thing to have the most coverage.
Great, thank you. And one of the things that I was curious about is your journey in machine learning and getting to work for Github and what that's been like, and also if there was anything that you would change in the computer science curriculum, what would it be with the eye on future skills that would be needed to build some of these, to build and localize the technologies of the future?
I consider myself extremely fortunate because I did not do my undergraduate in a pure College of Engineering. I did my undergraduate in a university that had letters and sciences. So that meant that I had 2 years of liberal arts education, which is I'm taking classes in French, 8 years of French. I still can't speak it, but I can eavesdrop and go shopping in Paris. I did classes in geography, in anthropology, in history, in the broad classics, and then I did 2 solid years of undergraduate work in computer science. What that means is that I have the ability to build products in a human-centered, centric approach, with a higher probability of product adoption, because you're building products in the context of society. And software used to be a vertical that stayed inside of technology. We were building maybe back-end type of servers and things like that, and it wasn't something that most people would interact with. Now software is eating the world, so it's no longer in a vertical of technology, it's literally everything. If you want to travel, you're using software. If you want to buy clothes, you're using software. So it's broadly adopted. And now we are getting to the challenge of the designers of the system. Most of them have had core engineering backgrounds. They don't know how people live. So often they build products that don't work well for society. And worst case scenario, some of those products then start to have a deleterious effect on society. So if I had to go back again and advise universities, is to make sure that computer science students, or any kind of student that builds products in technology but ships it in the context of society, must have a liberal arts education. It's a must, not a nice to have. It is literally the most important. Otherwise, you build things that have such deleterious effects that can take multiple generations to dig out of.
As we line up questions really quickly, the last question for you before, we'd love to hear from you, the questions that you have for Omoju and I. And what are you most excited about when you look at the future of technology, not only in the Bay Area, but also on the continent?
The thing that continues to excite me is actually open source. I feel like it's the last noble effort of humanity. It's the one thing where we all participate in. Last year, we saw the picture of the black hole. That was something that came together through years of effort of people writing all kinds of Python libraries. I want to see that kind of breakthrough, something that could never happen without all of us coming together, the power of all of us to push humanity forward. That's what excites me the most.
Do we have any questions? Please go ahead. Oh, sorry, we'll go and then there and then here.
Hi, you can hear me?
Yes.
So I'm a tech founder myself. We're working on actually building on Google Maps in a way that we understand different minority groups, including women's safety concerns, and how we actually, through our everyday movements, actually create that change by contributing our data. So my question to you is, how is GitHub or any recommendations on how we can start to bridge the gaps of, I guess, invisible women or invisible minorities, of how we can contribute our information, but in a more meaningful way that's driving the change we want?
This is a very complex question because often people who are minority groups, when they contribute data or do stuff on the internet, it could also allow you to be targeted. And so we have to find a way to submit that data, anonymize it and aggregate so that not one particular woman can be targeted, but just saying we are donating this to humanity. Here is a data set that has been verified, and we can tell you that all the data points in this data set come from people with protected classes. So as long as you just do anonymity and know that you cannot triangulate and reverse engineer and say, she is the one, and this is her address, and go attack her. As long as we don't do that, we'll be fine.
Hi, my name is Roshni, and you mentioned earlier that you're seeing a lot of activity, consumer internet activity happening in Kenya, Nigeria, Egypt, and South Africa. Can you share some of the similarities between these countries and some of the core differences?
I haven't been to Cairo, Egypt, and other parts of Egypt, but I can talk about the other ones I've been to. One thing that we all do is we go shopping and we want to pay for things. We're buying gas at the station. Some of us are ordering food in our house. Literally, the biggest universal challenge is payments. Payments. And not necessarily for those who are banked, for majority who are actually unbanked. When I went to Masai Mara, I was blown away because whenever I go to places, I like going off the beaten path, especially to rural places. I was stunned that there was nowhere I went to in the village that did not have a Safaricom kiosk with M-Pesa. I was like, this is the future. Literally everywhere, thorough penetration. I want to see that in every African country because it works in the city and then you go to the village and then you're in a dead zone.
And just to add onto that anecdote, speaking of shopping, I bought a beautiful jacket from a Zambian designer, and I paid with M-Pesa because they have a thing on their website where I could pay with my mobile money, and my jacket arrived in 2 weeks. It was wonderful because then it was just like, I just paid using mobile money. It was brilliant. Yeah, so, but there's a lot more that needs to be done so that we can have more inter-African trade, because right now there's still a couple of friction points, and the taxes on goods moving from place to place is still quite high, but we can continue to try and reduce the friction of payments.
All right, I think we're out of time.
I think. Yes. Will you come?
Yes, we're all coming. DLD Salon, Nairobi.
I think all of you, we all should much more pay attention to the amazing achievements in Africa. And I tell you, I have few ideas about it. I need much more about it. I need much more knowledge. And I'm happy to come. We do this.
You're very welcome.
We invite you to come to us in Africa and have fun.
It's important. It's important. We know everything about our computers, about the US, about whatever, Mallorca, but we have no idea what the next continent is, and we should get to know it. Just sorry for interrupting you.
That's okay.
And she was the minister for COP. What have you been?
Thank you, Steffi. I've been working as the Minister for International Affairs of Bavaria. You can't say this. We said it was the Minister for Europe, but we were working in Senegal, for example, and in Tunisia, and we were in the south of Africa. And I think it's very important to see the situation there, to see these young people, to see the possibilities they could have if they had a buddy beside to help them. And I think it's great that 2 African women are sitting here and talking and telling us about the possibilities, about the challenges in your country. Yeah. In your countries, in your continent. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was amazing.
For us, Africa is such a magic word. We are not aware about that many countries. Yeah, of course we are aware, but we are not going deeper into it. Why not? We should. We really should. And I encourage you to come with us to Nairobi.
Welcome. We can't wait to have you. Yeah, we'll curate a really great experience, and really looking forward to hosting you in Nairobi.
Super.
Thank you.
It's a promise.